The ambush was staged in the one place I still considered a sanctuary, my own apartment. Sunday dinner had been my mother's idea, a let's just be a family for once plea that had curled down the phone line, slick with a guilt I was all too familiar with. I should have known. In our family, just being a family was code for an impending shakedown. They arrived not as guests, but as a tactical unit. My father, a man whose spine seemed to have been replaced by a weather vane that only pointed toward my mother's moods, carried a bottle of cheap Prosecco like a white flag. My mother, her face arranged in an expression of beatific maternal love that never quite reached her eyes, held a Tupperware of her famously dry pot roast. And behind them, glowing with a self-satisfaction that was almost radioactive, was my sister, Chloe. "Maya, darling," my mother chirped, sweeping past me to place the pot roast on my kitchen counter. "You're looking thin, are you eating?" It was her standard opening, a little jab wrapped in concern. It meant, you work too much, you're neglecting yourself, and by extension, you're neglecting us. I was 28, a senior project manager at a tech firm and the only person in my family who understood the concept of a 401k, but in their eyes I was still the perpetually serious, slightly disappointing older child. Chloe drifted in, her hand conspicuously placed on her stomach. It wasn't a baby, it was the ring. A diamond the size of a small planetoid glittered on her left hand, catching the light from my floor-to-ceiling windows and scattering it across the room. It was a declaration of war. "Oh, this old thing," she said, feigning surprise as I stared at it. It was a line so worn, so transparent, it was practically a family heirloom. "Chloe, honey, you didn't tell her," my mother gasped with the practiced shock of a B-list actress. This was the play. This was the performance they had rehearsed in the car on the way over. I was the audience, the mark, the unwilling participant in their domestic theatre. We sat, they beamed. I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. My apartment, usually a haven of clean lines, minimalist furniture and quiet solitude, suddenly felt cramped and loud, contaminated by their cloying energy. "Mark proposed last night," Chloe announced, her voice a breathless trill. Mark was fine, a perfectly pleasant beige-coloured man who worked in finance and seemed perpetually bewildered by Chloe's dramatics. He was stable. He was safe. He was, I suspected, completely besotted. "We're so happy for you," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Happiness was a foreign country in this family. We only ever dealt in transactions. "And we want to get married soon," my father chimed in, finally speaking. "A spring wedding." Spring was 6 months away. I did a quick, silent calculation. The venue, the dress, the catering, the flowers. The number that flashed in my mind had 5 zeros at the end of it. My mother leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "And that's what we wanted to talk to you about, sweetie. We know how much you love Chloe, and we know how practical you are." Practical, their word for, has money she doesn't spend on frivolous nonsense. Chloe took over, her voice dropping into a tone of sisterly intimacy that was more unnerving than her usual demands. "Maya, I want it to be perfect. A real fairy tale. And well, you know how things are with Mom and Dad." I knew my father's consulting business was a thinly veiled retirement funded by a dwindling inheritance. My mother's part-time job at a boutique was for the discount, not the income. They were mortgaged to the hilt, living a life they couldn't afford, a performance for neighbors who didn't care. "And Mark is still paying off his student loans," Chloe added, a delicate little sigh. "He's putting everything he has into the down payment for our house." The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. It was my cue. I was supposed to leap in to offer to save the day as I had so many times before. When Chloe's car broke down, when my father had a bad investment, when my mother needed a new roof. I was the family's emergency fund, the ever-reliable backstop. "What are you asking?" I asked, my voice flat. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. It was cold. "We're not asking, darling, we're hoping. We were hoping you'd want to contribute, to give your sister the wedding she deserves." Contribute, I repeated. The word was a lie. Chloe's face, which had been a mask of sweet anticipation, hardened for a fraction of a second. "I've already started a Pinterest board. The venue I want is the Willows and they book up fast. And I'll need a planner, of course, someone good. I can't be expected to do all this myself." The audacity of it was breathtaking. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking for my time, my labor, my sanity. They wanted me to orchestrate and bankroll the entire spectacle. "The Willows," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Chloe, that's one of the most expensive venues in the state." It's my day, she said, her chin jutting out. It should be perfect. Your sister is right, my father said, his voice taking on a tone of paternal authority he hadn't earned. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. It's a time for family to step up. My gaze swept over the three of them. Their faces were a united front of entitlement. They had discussed this. They had planned this ambush. They had decided without my consent how my hard-earned money and my precious free time would be spent. The unfairness of it was a physical blow. I thought of the vacation I'd been saving for, a solo trip to Japan that I'd been dreaming of for years. I thought of the down payment I was trying to build for a bigger place. All of it, in their minds, was secondary to Chloe's fairy tale wedding. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them to get out. I wanted to list every sacrifice I'd ever made, every time I'd put their needs before my own. But the weight of years of conditioning, of being the good daughter, the responsible one, pressed down on me. Arguing would lead to tears, theirs, to accusations of selfishness, to weeks of frozen silence. It was a battle I had never won. And so, with a sense of grim inevitability, I heard myself say the words that would seal my fate. Okay, I said, the word was a surrender. I'll help. The relief in the room was immediate and suffocating. My mother's smile became genuine. My father leaned back, his duty done. Chloe clapped her hands together, a child who had just been handed a pony. Oh, Maya, I knew you'd understand, she squealed, rushing over to hug me. Her embrace was tight, proprietary. It felt less like a hug and more like a branding. You're the best sister ever. I'll send you the link to my Pinterest. You can start making the calls tomorrow. She pulled back, her eyes shining with triumph. This is going to be the best wedding ever, and it's all thanks to you. As they finally left, leaving behind the dregs of the Prosecco and the lingering scent of my mother's perfume, I stood alone in the center of my living room. The silence was a relief, but it was a cold one. I looked at the indentation on the couch where they had sat, a physical reminder of their invasion. They thought I was doing this out of love, out of duty. And maybe a small, foolish part of me was. But as I stood there, the knot in my stomach twisting into something sharp and ugly, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. A different feeling was taking root in the depleted soil of my generosity. A tiny, bitter seed of resentment. They wanted a fairy tale. They wanted me to be the fairy godmother. But they forgot that in some of the old stories, the fairy godmother isn't just a benevolent helper. Sometimes she's the one who sets the curse. And as I began to clear away the remnants of their celebration, I felt a strange, dark sense of purpose begin to dawn. I would give Chloe the wedding she deserved, one way or another. The first casualty of the wedding was my sleep. The second was my dignity. Chloe's Pinterest board was not a collection of ideas, it was a manifesto of delusion. It was a sea of blush and bashful, of cascading floral arrangements that cost more than my first car, of 7-tiered cakes and custom monogrammed everything. It was a vision of Versailles, on a budget I was now apparently expected to provide. My days became a blur of spreadsheets and vendor calls, squeezed into my lunch breaks and the precious hours after I got home from my actual paying job. My evenings were consumed by Chloe. She would call, her voice a frantic whine, to debate the merits of ecru versus eggshell for the invitations, a conversation that could stretch for an hour and end with her deciding she wanted pearlescent white after all. You're the project manager, Maya, she'd say, as if bestowing a great honor upon me. You handle the details. Handling the details meant I was no longer her sister, I was her executive assistant. I was to schedule tastings, haggle with photographers and chase down RSVPs. But I was not allowed to have an opinion. Every suggestion I made was met with a wrinkled nose or a dismissive wave of her newly manicured hand. No, Maya, peonies, not roses. It's a completely different vibe, she'd say, her tone suggesting I'd just proposed serving hot dogs at the reception. My parents were no help. They had adopted the role of benevolent overseers, occasionally swooping in to offer unhelpful advice or to remind me of the stakes. This is Chloe's dream, my mother would tell me in a hushed, conspiratorial tone, as if Chloe were a fragile, mystical creature and not a 25-year-old woman who still brought her laundry home. We have to make it perfect for her. The word "we" was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. We didn't mean my mother was going to spend hours on the phone with a recalcitrant florist. We didn't mean my father was going to dip into his precious savings. We meant me. I was the we. The resentment I'd felt on that first night was no longer a seed. It was a hardy, thriving weed, wrapping its tendrils around my heart. It soured my morning coffee. It was the silent scream in my head during conference calls. It was the exhaustion that clung to me like a second skin. The breaking point, the moment the weed flowered into something poisonous, came during a dress fitting. Chloe had chosen a designer boutique where the price tags were hidden, a sure sign that they were astronomical. She had tried on a dozen dresses, each one a mountain of tulle and lace, leaving a trail of discarded silk in her wake. She finally settled on a strapless monstrosity, with so much beading it looked like it had been caught in a diamond hailstorm. It was ostentatious, it was unflattering, and it cost more than my emergency fund. "This is the one," she breathed, staring at her reflection with a reverence usually reserved for religious icons. The sales assistant, a woman with the predatory smile of a shark, turned to me. "And how will we be paying for this today?" Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide and expectant. "Maya." "I'll need to transfer some funds," I said, my voice tight. "Can you hold it for a day?" Chloe's face fell. "But I want it now. What if someone else buys it?" "No one is going to buy a dress this expensive off the rack, Chloe," I said, my patience fraying. "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "It's my dress, you can't put a price on happiness." "I can," I muttered under my breath, "and it's $12,000. My mother, who had been observing from a velvet armchair, chose that moment to intervene. "Maya, don't spoil the moment. Your sister is having a magical experience." I looked from my mother's placid, smiling face to my sister's petulant pout, and something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, seismic shift. The part of me that still cared, that still hoped for their approval, simply withered and died. Later that week, while drowning my sorrows in a glass of wine and a mountain of wedding-related paperwork, I decided to do some digging. Chloe had been cagey about her phone, snatching it away if I came too close, a new development that pinged my project manager senses. A project has risks, and an unsecured variable is a risk. I didn't have to look far. She was still logged into her Facebook account on my laptop from a time she'd used it to show me a picture of a centerpiece she wanted. It was careless, arrogant. She didn't see me as a threat. She didn't see me at all. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened her messages. It felt like a violation, but I reasoned that my entire life had become a violation. My privacy, my finances, my time, all had been breached. And there it was, a long, intimate message thread with a name that made my blood run cold. Liam. Liam had been Chloe's college boyfriend. He was older, wealthier, and married. Their relationship had been a torrid, dramatic affair that had ended, I thought, when his wife found out and he'd gone crawling back to her. Apparently, the armistice had been temporary. The messages were a nauseating mix of saccharine pet names and explicit plans. They had met up, several times. The dates corresponded with Chloe's mysterious yoga weekends. "Mark is sweet, but he's not you," one of her messages read. "He gives me stability, you give me fire." "Just get the ring, baby," Liam had replied. "Get the house, then we can have our fun, my treat." I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. It wasn't just a flirtation. It was a plan, a long-term strategy. She was using Mark, this kind, unsuspecting man, as a stepping stone. She was building a comfortable little life for herself, funded by my labor and Mark's devotion, with her rich lover waiting in the wings. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of it was staggering. She was going to stand at an altar, in a $12,000 dress I paid for, and lie to a man who loved her. She was going to build a marriage on a foundation of deceit, and she was using me to pour the concrete. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. The resentment was gone. In its place was a cold, clear, and utterly placid fury. It was the eye of the hurricane. Everything was still, but I knew the storm was coming. I thought about showing the messages to my parents. But what would they do? Create a scene, cry, and then inevitably find a way to forgive Chloe. They would sweep it under the rug. They would choose her, their golden girl, over the uncomfortable truth. They always did. I thought about showing them to Mark, but that would be a simple, clean act of honesty. It was what he deserved, but it was what Chloe deserved. Chloe deserved a reckoning. She deserved to have her perfect, curated world, the one she was building on the backs of others, come crashing down around her. I opened my laptop again and took screenshots of everything. The messages, the pictures, the dates. I saved them to a secure folder, a little digital bomb waiting for the right moment to detonate. The wedding planning continued, but now my role had changed. I was no longer the put-upon sister, the reluctant financier. I was a saboteur. I was an architect of chaos hiding in plain sight. When Chloe asked me to book the DJ, I found the one with the worst reviews, a man whose specialty seemed to be playing the chicken dance at inappropriate moments. His website was a monument to bad taste, but I talked him up to Chloe. He's got a really unique retro vibe, I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. Very ironic. She bought it, of course she did. She was too busy texting Liam to notice. I was still her servant. I still answered her calls and paid her bills, but I was no longer her victim. I was the keeper of her secrets, the silent, smiling orchestrator of her downfall. And as I ticked off another item on my wedding to-do list, I felt a grim, satisfying sense of purpose. The fairy tale was still on schedule, but now it was going to have a very different ending. An ending of my own design. Every project has a critical path, a sequence of tasks that must be completed on time for the entire project to succeed. For Chloe's wedding, the critical path led directly through the Willows, the ridiculously opulent venue she'd fixated on. It was the centerpiece of her fairy tale, the stage upon which her grand performance would be set. And it was the first place I decided to burn to the ground. Getting the initial booking had been a nightmare. It required a non-refundable deposit that made my stomach clench and a contract thicker than a phone book. Chloe had signed it without reading it, too busy debating whether her grand entrance should be heralded by a string quartet or a harpist. I, however, had read every word. I knew the cancellation clauses by heart. I knew the deadlines. I knew exactly how much rope to give her. The venue coordinator, a woman named Beatrice with a helmet of blonde hair and a voice that could curdle milk, was my unwitting accomplice. She sent a steady stream of emails, each one requiring a decision. Meal selections, linen colours, chair styles. The minutiae were endless, and I dutifully forwarded every single one to Chloe. "You handle it," she'd text back, usually accompanied by a selfie of her trying on a new shade of lipstick. "Just make it perfect." "Beatrice needs the final head count and meal choices by the 15th, I'd reply, knowing full well the 15th was a hard deadline. The contract stipulated that if we missed it, we'd be locked into the most expensive catering package for the maximum number of guests, a difference of nearly $10,000. Fine, I'll look at it later," she'd write. Later never came. She was too busy with her yoga weekends, too consumed by her secret life with Liam. She was flying high on the thermals of her own entitlement, completely oblivious to the fact that I was no longer the safety net below her. I was the one aiming the surface-to-air missile. On the 14th, I sent her a final, gentle reminder. "Hey, don't forget Beatrice needs the final numbers by tomorrow. Let me know what you want to do." I made sure the message was time-stamped, a perfect little piece of evidence for my defense. The 15th came and went, silence. On the 16th, Beatrice's email landed in my inbox, exactly as I knew it would. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate politeness. "Per our contract," she wrote, "as we have not received your final selections by the deadline, we have gone ahead and confirmed your booking for the Platinum package for 200 guests. We are so looking forward to hosting your special day." I stared at the email, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. It was a beautiful moment, a perfect, elegant little disaster. I waited until dinner time, then I called Chloe. I let a note of panic, honed by years of cleaning up her messes, creep into my voice. "Chloe, I just got an email from Beatrice. Did you ever send her the meal choices?" "What? No, I told you to handle it," she said, her voice sharp, defensive. "I can't make that decision for you. I sent you the email a dozen times," I protested, playing my part to perfection. "They've locked us into the most expensive package, for 200 people. The shriek on the other end of the line was everything I had hoped for. It was a symphony of spoiled rage. "What do you mean? You were supposed to be on top of this. You're the project manager." "I am managing the project, Chloe, but you're the client. You have to make the decisions." "This is your fault," she screamed. "You've ruined everything. That's thousands of dollars, money that you were supposed to be managing." The hypocrisy was so potent it was almost dizzying. She called our parents. Of course she did. Within 20 minutes my father was on the phone, his voice thick with disappointment. "Maya, your mother is very upset," he began. "Chloe is in tears. How could you let this happen?" "I did let it happen, Dad. I sent her the forms, I reminded her of the deadline. She ignored it." "You should have been more forceful," he said. "You know how your sister is, you have to stay on top of her." It was the same old story. Chloe's irresponsibility was a given, a law of nature. My competence was the variable, the thing that had to adjust to accommodate her failings. I was the responsible one, so everything, by definition, was my responsibility. I am not her keeper, I said, my voice dangerously low. You're her sister, you're supposed to be helping her, he boomed. This is a disaster, you need to fix this. Call that woman Beatrice, charm her, cry if you have to, get that deposit back. And that was it. That was the moment the last, withered root of my familial duty was severed. The demand that I not only clean up the mess, but that I humiliate myself to do it. That I should cry, that I should beg, that I should deploy my emotions as a tool to fix a problem they had created. No, I said. The word was small, but it felt like a tectonic plate shifting inside me. What did you say? My father asked, his voice incredulous. I said no, I will not call Beatrice, I will not beg, the contract is binding, the money is gone. This is the consequence of Chloe's actions. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. It was the sound of a worldview being challenged, of a dynamic that had been in place for decades suddenly being upended. You're unbelievable, he finally stammered, after everything we've done for you. I almost laughed. Everything you've done for me, I'm paying for this entire wedding, I'm planning this entire wedding. I am working 2 full-time jobs, one of which is for your darling daughter, and I am getting nothing but grief in return, so you will not speak to me about what you have done for me. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling not with fear but with adrenaline. It was done. The declaration of war had been made. The fallout was immediate. Chloe sent me a string of venomous texts, calling me a jealous, incompetent shrew. My mother left me a tearful voicemail about how I was tearing the family apart. I listened to it, deleted it, and blocked all their numbers. For 2 glorious days there was silence. I slept. I ate food that wasn't consumed over a keyboard. I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease for the first time in months. But I knew it wasn't over. They had lost the venue, but they wouldn't lose the war. They would regroup. They would find a new angle of attack, and I would be ready. The breaking point had come and gone. The resentment had burned away, leaving behind something much harder, much colder, a diamond-sharp clarity of purpose. They thought this was a disaster, a setback. They had no idea. This wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy. I was no longer just a saboteur. I was a general in the field, and I had just won the first major battle. The war for Chloe's wedding was far from over, but I had the tactical advantage. I had the truth, I had the evidence, and I had something they had never ever counted on, a backbone. And I was going to use it to bring their whole rotten, entitled world crashing down. The real chaos was just beginning. After the great venue catastrophe, a ceasefire was declared. It was a tense, fragile peace, brokered by my father in a series of pleading phone calls that I eventually, strategically, decided to answer. The new arrangement was simple. I was still on the hook financially, but my planning duties were to be supervised by a committee. The committee consisted of my mother and Chloe. It was a farce, but it was a useful one. It allowed me to feign incompetence while executing my plans with surgical precision. My new role was that of the chastened, slightly clueless sister, trying her best to make amends. It was a part I played with relish. I would present them with options, carefully curated to lead them to the exact disastrous choice I wanted them to make. First, the baker. I spent a week researching, not the best bakers but the worst. I was looking for a specific kind of bad, the ambitious amateur. The person whose photos looked suspiciously good but whose reviews contained words like interesting, unique, and not what we expected. I found my man in Cakes by Lionel. Lionel's website was a gallery of glorious, gravity-defying cakes that were almost certainly stolen from other, better bakers' websites. His actual work, which I found by cross-referencing his tagged photos on Instagram, was a horror show. Leaning towers of fondant, lopsided tiers, colours that bled into each other. He was perfect. I found this baker, he's very affordable, I told the committee, showing them the glossy, professional and stolen photos from his site. He's an up-and-coming artist, so his prices are still reasonable. My mother, whose primary motivation was the appearance of wealth without the actual expense, latched onto the word, affordable. Chloe, who saw herself as a patron of the arts, loved the idea of discovering a hidden genius. I love it, Chloe declared, it's so artisanal. We had a tasting. Lionel, a nervous man who sweated profusely, presented us with a series of dry, crumbly cupcakes. He explained that his true talent was in the visual medium, and that the taste was secondary to the structure. I watched, barely suppressing a smile, as Chloe and my mother nodded seriously, completely buying his nonsensical jargon. They booked him on the spot for a 5-tiered monstrosity based on a picture he'd clearly lifted from a celebrity wedding. I knew the final product would be a tacky, lopsided nightmare. Mission accomplished. Next, the DJ. My research into DJ Disaster, his actual unfortunate stage name, had paid off. I'd sold him to Chloe as a performance artist who specialized in ironic retro sets. He creates a whole vibe, I'd explained, using the kind of vague, trendy language she was susceptible to. It's not just a playlist, it's an experience. She'd eaten it up. I'd handled the contract myself. In the fine print, I'd given him complete creative control, a clause I knew he'd interpret as a license to play the Macarena on a loop. I also made sure his setup required a specific, obscure type of power outlet, one that the new, much cheaper venue, a soulless hotel ballroom, did not have. I'd already spoken to the hotel's maintenance guy. A crisp $50 bill had ensured that any attempts to find an adapter on the day of the wedding would be met with a shrug and a vacant stare. There would be technical difficulties. Glorious, prolonged, music-free technical difficulties. The final piece of this particular puzzle was the bridesmaid dresses. Chloe had a vision of her bridal party as a shimmering host of golden goddesses. She wanted silk, she wanted floor length, she wanted couture. I, her humble servant, was tasked with finding an affordable alternative. I found a wholesaler online, a company based overseas with a questionable return policy and a color palette that was, to put it mildly, inconsistent. I showed Chloe a swatch on my computer monitor, a beautiful shimmering gold. "This is the one," she'd breathed. I ordered 7 of them, but I didn't order them in golden champagne, the color on the screen. I ordered them in spicy mustard. The swatch for spicy mustard was on the website only a few shades off, but I had done my due diligence. I had ordered a sample swatch for myself weeks earlier. It was not a spicy mustard. It was the color of a baby's first solid food. A sickly, greenish, brownish yellow that flattered absolutely no one. I played the part of the stressed, overwhelmed sister beautifully. I sighed heavily during our committee meetings. I made notes. I presented my terrible options with a furrowed brow and a harried expression. "I'm trying my best," I'd say, my voice laced with manufactured exhaustion. "This is all so much to keep track of." They lapped it up. My supposed incompetence confirmed their narrative. I was the practical, boring one out of my depth in this world of aesthetics and taste. They were the visionaries, the tastemakers. They were in control. My mother would pat my hand. There, dear, you're doing your best, just leave the big decisions to us." And I would smile, a meek, grateful little smile, and say, "Okay, Mom." Meanwhile, my real project was humming along in the background. The anonymous email account was set up. The screenshots of Chloe's affair with Liam were organized in a neat little folder, ready to be deployed. I had even, in a moment of inspired cruelty, found Liam's wife's private Instagram account. She posted endless photos of her happy family, her handsome husband, her perfect life. Each post was a little stab of oblivious contentment. I felt a pang of pity for her, but it was quickly overshadowed by the cold fire of my resolve. She was collateral damage in a war she didn't know she was fighting. But Chloe had made her a part of it, and the truth, when it came, would be its own kind of justice. One evening, as I was updating my master spreadsheet, a document that had 2 tabs, official wedding plan and actual revenge plan, Chloe called me. It was a rare, unsolicited call that wasn't a demand. "Hey," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Hey," I replied, my guard immediately up. "I just wanted to, say thank you." I almost dropped the phone. "For what?" "For trying," she said. "I know I've been a bridezilla or whatever, but I do appreciate you, you're a good sister." The words were a calculated move, a little breadcrumb of affection to keep me in line. A month ago they might have worked. They might have made me feel guilty, made me question what I was doing. But now they just made me angry. The audacity, the sheer unmitigated gall of it. To play the sweet, grateful sister while actively planning to betray her fiancé, while treating me like dirt, while living a life built on lies. I thought of the mustard-colored dresses hanging in a warehouse somewhere, waiting for their moment. I thought of DJ Disaster, probably practicing his air horn sound effects. I thought of Lionel, the baker, likely sculpting a cherub with a terrifyingly vacant stare. And I felt a sense of calm settle over me, a righteous, chilling calm. "Of course, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Anything for you, I just want you to be happy." And I did. I wanted her to be so happy, right up until the moment her world came crashing down. I wanted her to walk down that aisle, beaming, convinced that her perfect day had arrived. I wanted her to feel the giddy triumph of getting everything she ever wanted. Because the higher you fly, the harder you fall. And I was building her a beautiful, gilded cage, and she was flying right into it, singing all the way. The art of sabotage was not just about creating chaos. It was about creating the perfect, beautiful, pristine illusion, right before you shattered it into a million pieces. The minor acts of sabotage were satisfying, like little appetizers before a feast. The cake, the music, the dresses, they were the trimmings, the decorative elements of the disaster I was building. But the main course, the centerpiece of my revenge, required more than just bad taste and creative incompetence. It required a bomb, and the bomb was Liam. My initial discovery of their affair was the spark, but I needed gunpowder. I needed undeniable, soul-crushing proof. The kind of proof that couldn't be explained away, denied, or swept under the family's very lumpy rug. Chloe was arrogant, but she wasn't stupid. She was covering her tracks better now, deleting messages, using coded language. But every system has a vulnerability. Chloe's was her vanity. She had a private Instagram account, a so-called Finsta that she used to post things that were too risque for her main, family-friendly feed. It was a curated collection of her own self-worship. Sultry selfies, expensive meals, and glimpses of a life that didn't quite line up with that of a blushing bride-to-be. I didn't have access to it, but I knew someone who might. Sarah had been one of Chloe's best friends in college, a co-conspirator in many of her youthful dramas. They had had a falling out a few years ago over something trivial, as most of Chloe's friendships ended. But I knew Sarah still held a grudge, and I knew she was the kind of person who would appreciate a little well-directed chaos. I took her to lunch at a place that was far too expensive for a casual catch-up. I let her vent about her job, her boyfriend, her life. I listened. And then, when the moment was right, I brought up Chloe. "She's getting married," I said, my voice laced with a carefully calibrated mix of sisterly pride and exhaustion. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Let me guess, you're paying for it." "And planning it," I said with a wry smile. "Of course you are," she said, a bitter little laugh. "Some things never change." I leaned in, dropping my voice. "She's been difficult." "She's Chloe," Sarah said. "Difficult is her factory setting." "She's been secretive too," I said, planting the seed. "Always on her phone, and she has this private Instagram I'm not allowed to see. It's probably nothing but—" I let the sentence hang in the air. Sarah's eyes lit up with a familiar, gossipy gleam. "Oh, you mean Chloe's real life? Yeah, I still follow that one. She forgot to block me after our fight." My heart gave a little leap. "You do?" "Oh yeah," she said, pulling out her phone. "It's a gold mine of cringe. Wait till you see the pictures from her yoga retreat last month." She turned the phone around, and there it was, the gunpowder. It wasn't just a picture, it was a whole carousel of them. Chloe and Liam lounging by a hotel pool, Chloe and Liam clinking champagne glasses, a fancy dinner spread before them. And the final damning shot, a selfie of the two of them wrapped in hotel bathrobes, Chloe's head nestled on his shoulder, a smug, possessive smile on her face. The geotag was a luxury resort in the next state. The date was the exact weekend she was supposed to be at a silent meditation retreat. "Wow," I said, my voice a breathy whisper of feigned shock. "She told us she went alone." "Alone with her rich, married boyfriend, you mean?" Sarah snorted, scrolling back through the feed. "He's all over it. She thinks she's being subtle, never showing his face, but it's so obvious." I took a mental snapshot of everything. The dates, the locations, the comments from other secret followers. I had it. The bomb was built. Now I just needed to find the right person to light the fuse. My first thought was to send it all to Mark, but that felt too simple. He would be heartbroken, yes. He would call off the wedding. But my family, my mother and father, would spin it. They would paint Chloe as the victim, a poor, confused girl led astray by a predatory older man. They would close ranks, protect her, and I would be cast as the villain who brought this pain upon them. No, the detonation had to be public. It had to be undeniable. And it had to come from a source so irate, so wronged, that no one could question their motives. It was time to contact Liam's wife. Finding her was easy. Her name was Catherine, and she was a prominent figure in her community, the chair of several charities, a woman who cultivated an image of domestic perfection. Her social media was a testament to this, a carefully curated gallery of her perfect husband, her perfect children, her perfect life. I created a new anonymous email address. The subject line was simple: "Your husband." The body of the email was even simpler. I think you should see this. I attached the screenshots from the Finsta. The pool pictures, the champagne, the bathrobes. I attached the old Facebook messages I had saved, the ones where they planned their sordid future together. I attached everything. I hit send and it felt like dropping a match into a barrel of gasoline. The response came less than an hour later. Who is this? I hadn't expected a reply. I had expected her to go nuclear on her husband, to hire a lawyer to set her perfect life on fire. The fact that she was replying to me, a faceless stranger, was interesting. It meant she was cautious. She was gathering information before she acted. I respected that. I wrote back, a friend, someone who thinks you deserve to know the truth. The woman's name is Chloe. She's getting married next month to another man. I included a link to Chloe and Mark's public wedding website, the one filled with saccharine photos and stories about their perfect love. It was a cruel touch, but a necessary one. I wanted Catherine to see the full scope of the betrayal. Her reply was instant. What do you want? It was the right question. What did I want? I wanted justice. I wanted a reckoning. I wanted to see the whole rotten structure of my family's hypocrisy come crashing down. I want you to have the truth, I wrote. What you do with it is up to you. But if I were you, I'd want to see the look on his face when he realizes the game is up, and I'd want to see the look on hers. I added one final, perfect little detail. The wedding is on Saturday, October 23rd, at the Grand Imperial Ballroom. The ceremony starts at 4 p.m. I'm sure you wouldn't want to make a scene. It was a masterstroke of reverse psychology. By telling her not to make a scene, I was all but guaranteeing that she would. I was giving her the time, the place, and the motivation. I was handing her a lighted torch and pointing her toward the armory. I didn't hear back from her after that. I didn't need to. The fuse was lit. The bomb was ticking. The final weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. The mustard-colored dresses arrived, and the bridesmaids. Horror was a private, delicious joy. I picked up the wedding cake from Lionel myself. It was even worse than I had imagined, a leaning, garish monstrosity that looked like it was melting in on itself. I told him it was a masterpiece. Through it all, I was the picture of calm, supportive sisterhood. I soothed Chloe's nerves. I reassured my mother. I played my part. But underneath the placid surface, I was vibrating with a terrible, thrilling energy. I had built the stage. I had set the props. I had hired the actors and armed the assassins. All the pieces were in place. All that was left was to raise the curtain and watch the show. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it was going to be a grand finale. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect, cloudless sky that was a mockery of the storm I knew was about to break. My phone buzzed with a text from Chloe at 6 a.m. It's here, my perfect day. I stared at the words, a cold, placid smile on my face. Oh honey, asterisk, I thought, you have no idea. My role for the day was that of the ever-dutiful maid of honor. It was a position I had been given not out of love, but out of necessity. Chloe trusted no one else to execute her vision, and I was, in her eyes, the most reliable tool in her shed. I arrived at the hotel suite where she and her 7 bridesmaids were getting ready, a whirlwind of hairspray, nervous energy, and mimosas. The first detonation was a quiet one. It was the unveiling of the dresses. I had brought them in opaque garment bags, preserving the surprise. The bridesmaids, a collection of Chloe's sorority sisters and newer, shinier friends, had been told to expect shimmering gold silk. I unzipped the first bag. The dress emerged, not shimmering, not gold, but a flat, bilious yellow, the color of despair. The fabric was a cheap polyester that clung in all the wrong places. There was a moment of stunned silence. Is that the dress? One of them asked, her voice a horrified whisper. Chloe, who was having her hair tortured into an elaborate updo, turned from the mirror. Her face, which had been a mask of bridal bliss, crumpled. What is that? She demanded, her voice rising. That's not the color was gold. I feigned a gasp, rushing to the bag and pulling out the packing slip. Oh my God, you're right, they must have sent the wrong ones. It says, spicy mustard. Spicy mustard, a bridesmaid wailed. I look like a hot dog. Chloe was on her feet now, her half-finished hair trembling with rage. Call them, fix it. I can't have my bridesmaids looking like that. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying in a pantomime of frantic dialing. I'm trying, I said, my voice tight with fake panic. It's an overseas number, I'm not getting through. Chloe, I'm so sorry, I triple-checked the order, it must have been a shipping error. The excuse was flimsy, but in the chaos of the morning it was enough. There was no time to get new dresses. The mustard monstrosities would have to be worn. I watched as the 7 women, their faces a mixture of resignation and fury, put on the hideous garments. They looked like a row of jaundiced bananas. It was beautiful. The second detonation occurred at the reception venue, the soulless ballroom I had so carefully selected. The cake arrived. Lionel, the baker, wheeled it in himself, his face beaded with sweat. It was a masterpiece of incompetence. The 5 tiers leaned at a precarious angle, like a drunken wedding guest. The fondant, which was supposed to be a pristine white, was dotted with strange, greyish smudges. The hand-moulded sugar flowers looked like wilted cabbages. My mother saw it first. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. What is that?" "It's the cake," I said, my voice a study in bewildered disappointment. It looked so different in the pictures. Chloe, who had just arrived for a final walkthrough, took one look at the lopsided confection and let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "It's ruined. My wedding is ruined." Lionel, to his credit, tried to defend his creation. "It's avant-garde," he insisted, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. "A deconstruction of the traditional wedding cake form." Chloe was not appeased. There was screaming. There were tears. My father was called to run interference, his face a mask of weary resignation. He tried to argue with Lionel, who insisted that his artistic vision was being disrespected. They ended up hiding the cake in a service corridor, with a vague plan to only bring it out at the last possible moment, after the lights were dimmed. The ceremony itself was almost an anticlimax. Chloe, her face puffy from crying, managed to pull herself together enough to walk down the aisle. She looked at Mark, her eyes shining with what I knew were crocodile tears, and recited her vows in a clear, steady voice. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I stood beside her, holding her bouquet, my mustard-coloured dress a beacon of bad taste, and smiled serenely. Just wait, I thought. The best is yet to come. At the reception, the atmosphere was thick with a barely concealed tension. The bridesmaids were trying to hide in corners, their dresses glowing with a malevolent energy. The cake was a lurking monster in the hallway. And then the music started. Or rather, it didn't. DJ Disaster was having the technical difficulties I had so carefully engineered. He stood over his turntables, a look of profound confusion on his face, while a low, crackling hum filled the ballroom. "Folks were just, experiencing some interference," he announced into the microphone, his voice echoing awkwardly in the silent room. "Maybe from a nearby radio tower." My father, his face now a permanent shade of crimson, was dispatched to deal with this new crisis. I watched as he and the hotel's maintenance man, the one I had bribed, stood over a power outlet, shrugging helplessly. The guests were getting restless. The open bar was doing a brisk business, but the silence was unnerving. The first hour of the reception passed in a haze of forced conversation and the occasional deafening crackle from the sound system. Chloe was on the verge of a full-scale meltdown. She was huddled at the head table with my mother, their expressions a mirror of fury and despair. She kept shooting me venomous looks as if this were all my personal, malicious doing. And it was, but she could never prove it. I was just the hapless, incompetent sister, trying my best. Finally, after a torturous hour, the maintenance man miraculously found an adapter. DJ Disaster, flustered and eager to redeem himself, immediately launched into his set. It began with the chicken dance. The dance floor, which had been empty and expectant, remained empty and horrified. A few confused uncles started to flap their arms, but they were quickly silenced by the icy glares of their wives. The DJ, oblivious, transitioned from the chicken dance into the Macarena, and then into a series of obscure 80s power ballads. It was a symphony of terrible choices. The carefully constructed facade of Chloe's perfect day was not just cracking, it was crumbling. The dress, the cake, the music, it was a trifecta of tacky, humiliating failure. And I, the architect of it all, stood in the corner, sipping my champagne, a silent observer to the beautiful chaos I had wrought. I saw my father talking to the DJ, his hands gesturing wildly. I saw my mother trying to placate a group of her horrified friends. I saw Chloe, her face a mask of thunder, refusing to even look at her new husband, who was trying, bless his heart, to get her to dance to a Bon Jovi song. It was all going so perfectly. The stage was set, the audience was primed, the tension was at its peak, all that was left was the grand finale. And I knew as I checked the time on my phone that the final act was about to begin. The bomb was about to go off, and it was going to be spectacular. The moment arrived as I knew it would during the speeches. The best man, Mark's affable college roommate, was halfway through a rambling, good-natured story about their fraternity days. Behind him, a large projection screen that I had insisted on hiring, for a photo montage, I'd said, hummed waiting. Mark's best man raised his glass for a toast. To Mark and Chloe, he said, his voice full of genuine warmth, may your life together be as. He never finished the sentence. The microphone cut out with a deafening squawk of feedback. The screen behind him, which had been displaying a tasteful monogram of their initials, flickered. DJ Disaster, looking panicked, fiddled with his console. Technical difficulties again, folks, he announced, his voice trembling slightly. All eyes went to the screen. My mother shot me a look that could kill. Do something, it said. I'll check the cables, I said, my voice full of dutiful concern. I walked toward the small table at the back of the room where the laptop controlling the slideshow was set up. My laptop. As I reached the table, I tripped. My hand knocked against the laptop and the screen flickered again, but this time it didn't go back to the monogram. This time a new image appeared. It was the picture from the hotel pool. Chloe and Liam, lounging together, looking far too comfortable for two people who were just friends. The image was huge, projected 10 feet high for all 200 guests to see. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Mark at the head table squinted at the screen. What is that? Before Chloe could answer, before she could formulate a lie, I tapped the spacebar again. The next image appeared. Chloe and Liam clinking champagne glasses. Then the next, the two of them in hotel bathrobes, her head on his shoulder, a smug, intimate smile on her face. The murmuring in the room stopped. The silence was absolute, heavy and suffocating. I hit the spacebar again. Now it was the text messages. The incriminating, undeniable words blown up for everyone to read. Mark is sweet, but he's not you. He gives me stability, you give me fire. Just get the ring, baby. Get the house, then we can have our fun, my treat. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. It was a sound I would cherish for the rest of my life. Mark had risen from his chair. His face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the screen in dawning horrified comprehension. He turned to look at Chloe. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She was frozen, a deer caught not in the headlights, but in the full, unforgiving glare of a spotlight I had aimed directly at her soul. My parents were staring at the screen, their faces slack with disbelief. This was not something they could spin. This was not a situation they could manage. This was a truth so raw and so public it was inescapable. And then, as if on cue, the doors to the ballroom burst open. A woman stood there, silhouetted against the light of the hallway. She was tall, elegant, and radiating a fury so potent it was almost a physical force. It was Catherine, Liam's wife. She had dressed for the occasion in a sharp, tailored suit that made her look more like a prosecutor than a wedding guest. Her eyes scanned the room, found the head table and locked onto Chloe. There you are, she said, her voice not loud, but carrying with a chilling clarity in the dead, silent room. The little homewrecker who's been sleeping with my husband. She began to walk forward, her heels clicking on the polished floor like the ticking of a doomsday clock. She was holding her phone in her hand, held out like a weapon. I believe this is your handiwork, she said, her voice dripping with contempt as she gestured toward the screen. Though you weren't quite so brave when you were sending him pictures from my guest room, were you? Chloe finally found her voice. It was a pathetic, strangled squeak. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Catherine said, her smile a razor blade. She didn't stop at the head table. She walked right up to Chloe, close enough that their faces were inches apart. You are a parasite, Chloe, a cheap, grasping little parasite. And you, she said, turning her burning gaze on Mark, you are a fool. Mark didn't seem to hear her. He was still staring at Chloe, his face a canvas of utter devastation. The love in his eyes, which had been so bright and so genuine all day, had died, replaced by a cold, dead emptiness. Is it true? He whispered, his voice cracking. Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. A single tear traced a path through her perfect makeup. It was not a tear of remorse, it was a tear of self-pity. And that was when the dam broke. My mother started to sob, a loud, theatrical wail. My father was trying to get to his feet, his face purple with rage and shame, but he seemed to be frozen in place. Mark looked from Chloe to the screen, and then back to Chloe. He slowly, deliberately, took the wedding ring from his finger and dropped it on the table. The small, metallic clink was the sound of a life shattering. We're done, he said, his voice hollow. He turned and walked away, not looking back in the price of a party, directory pushing through the stunned, silent crowd of guests and out the ballroom doors. The spell was broken. The room erupted into chaos. Guests were on their feet, whispering, staring, pulling out their phones. Catherine, her work done, gave Chloe one last look of withering contempt and turned, walking out with the same deadly calm with which she had entered. My family was imploding. Chloe had collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with hysterical sobs. My mother was trying to comfort her, while my father was yelling at the DJ to turn off the screen, to do something to fix this. But there was nothing to fix, it was all broken. Their reputation, their pride, their carefully constructed world of lies and appearances, all of it shattered into a million pieces. I stood at the back of the room by my laptop, the silent, unseen architect of it all. I had done it. I had given Chloe the wedding she deserved, a day so perfect, so memorable that no one in that room would ever forget it. A small, satisfied smile touched my lips. I closed the laptop, the images of Chloe's betrayal disappearing into the darkness. My work here was done. Quietly, I slipped out a side door. I walked down the hotel corridor, the sounds of my family's public humiliation fading behind me. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cool night air. It felt clean, fresh. I took a deep breath, the first truly deep breath I had taken in 6 months. The weight that had been pressing down on me for years was gone. I was free. I had lost a family, but I had gained myself. And as I walked away from the wreckage of the party I had paid for, I knew, with a certainty that warmed me from the inside out, that it was the best money I had ever spent. The price of the party had been high, but the return on my investment was priceless. It was the sweet, silent, and utterly satisfying taste of revenge.